Welcome to the Grow Fast Podcast, where we talk with leading sales, marketing, and personal growth experts about how companies can accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow their businesses fast. Let's go. Hey, Pat, how are you?
Doing great. Can't complain.
Awesome. Well, hey, first off, I want to thank you for coming on the Grow Fast Podcast. It's early days for us, and to get somebody with your experience, both in sales and podcasting, to come on as a guest is a real honor. Before we kick things off, I was doing a little research. The Sales Babble podcast that you host has recorded over 500 episodes. That is amazing.
I know. It blows me away.
When did you start? Like in the 80s when there was no internet or podcasting? No.
Well, I'm thinking, actually, I think I started 10 years ago next month in March.
That's awesome. I total respect, because you got out ahead of the curve on this. Just out of curiosity, this was like almost
I totally felt like I was late.
Really? So was Rogan on the radar then?
And I don't, not to that degree then, but I think some. I know I had been listening to a podcast on golf for about 5 years.
Wow.
So they had started sometime 2006, 2007, and people have been podcasting for quite some time. And I felt like, I'm late.
Well, you've done an amazing job. I looked at Listen Notes, and they rank Sales Babble in the top 1.5% of all podcasts globally, which is awesome. I know that you've also done the Cannabis Advocate podcast, and then you have your own media company where you advise small and medium businesses in terms of podcasting and other, kind of promotional and sales and marketing strategies. I want to talk about all that. But before we do that, I'd like to talk about the book that you're working on, the Dao of Sales Babble. What is that?
Well, probably listeners don't know much about this, but I'm a big proponent for the philosophy called Taoism. Mm-hmm. And it's based on a book that a guy named Lao Tzu wrote 2,500 years ago. We're talking 500 years before Christ, around, even maybe older than Socrates. And it's a philosophy that talks about, it's fundamental in this notion of Wu Wei, actionless action or frictionless action. It's kind of how to live your life without overly pushing stuff, but kind of allowing things to happen. And eventually, without necessarily a lot of work, good things just happen. So it's about being kind of awake and present to how things go. I know it sounds kind of complex, confusing, but probably people have heard the quote, like, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. It's that guy. The guy who wrote that said that. Wrote that book, said that.
It's interesting because I actually lived in Asia off and on for 20-something years, including in Taiwan and Japan and Korea. And I have read some books on Taoism. And I remember one example was, there's a butcher who goes in and they're trying to work the meat, and it's just everything's getting all chopped up. But another one who kind of understands to let things flow in the natural course just goes through, and everything flows smoothly, and the meat just kind of comes right off the bone. Kind of a graphic example, but I think the point's there.
I think that's a good one. Another one's kind of like, I want to travel to that island over there. I could paddle all the way, right? Take a straight line there, but I could also put a sail up. And although I might go, tacking and jibing and going back and forth, but I could probably I can get there quicker with less work.
Yeah.
A lot of people think in sales that it's really about grinding or 10Xing it. You hear this, right? You just need to work harder. Not necessarily. You just need to think smarter. You need to work smarter. You need to allow the sale to happen as opposed to forcing it to happen.
Well, and I want to talk about how you apply that to specific examples, but I want to stay on Dao for just one more second. In Japan and Korea, it's pronounced Do. And probably most people have heard it in terms of like Taekwondo, Hapkido, in Japan, Aikido, Judo, and the way of the warrior is called Budo. So the Do is the way, and but that's kind of like martial situations, martial combat, martial arts. But it's also, they're very strong believers in there's a right way to do things. I mean, if you think about judo, it's all about if somebody pushes you, you don't push against them, you pull them, right? You use their energy. So let's go back to the context of sales. Give me an example how you would use Dao or Do in a sales situation.
Yeah, I actually got a few. Maybe I can share a few quotes from Lao Tzu.
Please.
Like here, this is a classic one. He said, "Water seems so soft, weak, yielding, yet easily overcomes the hard and strong." So if you think about like the Grand Canyon,
yeah,
it's like easy to put your hand in a bucket of water and pull it out. We wash ourselves with it. Water's soft, right? But given time and continual effort, it carved this huge canyon through. In sales, we know this to be true, that the average salesperson follows up a couple times before they give up on a deal, right? But studies have shown you have to try at least 8 more times. That's how many times it takes. When people are like, well, I don't want to bother people, I don't want to be annoying, most of the emails you send go to spam. A lot of the voicemails don't even get delivered that day, that moment. LinkedIn messages, right? You DM people. People log in once or twice, once a week or a couple times a month. They're just not seeing this stuff. You have to keep at it. You have to be persistent, and you need to be like water.
Yeah, I have seen Bruce Lee say that. You be like water, right? But I've never heard a sales trainer say that, and that is awesome, man.
He's got a good book on this. Actually, I've read his book. It's actually very good.
Yeah. I mean, but your point is just be persistent. You don't have to be overly forceful. You don't have to, Rome wasn't built in a day. You don't have to build that canyon or dig that canyon a day. Just be persistent and keep going. I think another thing that you said there is, you shouldn't make assumptions because, they didn't answer, so I'm just going to give up. I'm going to throw in the towel. Maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think that affects us in all aspects of our lives, making assumptions because something happens or doesn't happen.
I mean, there's this notion here. There's a quote. There's a quote he's got that to realize that you do not understand is virtue. Not to realize that you do not understand is a defect. So lots of times we think we know what's going on in the seller's mind. We know what's best for them. We know that if you buy this thing, it's totally going to work for you. But that's like hubris. That's just making assumptions. And whenever you assume, it makes an ass assumption that the sentence is going to finish some way, but it doesn't. Right?
Right. I was just making that assumption. I thought you were going to take it another direction, but.
I mean, that's how that, in reality, the best way that you can know how to help somebody is just to ask a genuine, authentic, open-ended question and listen. They'll tell you whether or not you're a good fit for them or not if you ask. But to assume everybody you talk to is a perfect fit for that, I don't know how many times I've gotten buttonholed in networking meetings and people just start pitching their crap on you. And they're not qualified at all. They've not asked an open-ended question. Is this a problem you have? Is this a desire that you want to experience? Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of some of your favorite open-ended questions?
I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and they were experiencing this issue. You guys are in the same industry. Have you experienced that?
Yeah. I like that.
Oh, really? Huh. Wow. And how does that impact your business? Oh, really? Oh, God, it's got to suck. What else? Well, I love that one. Well, what else?
Just keep it
going. And you just keep asking this. And next thing you know, I tell you what, if you get some people going like this, they can go for 15 minutes. And you don't pitch a single thing. You just ask.
I've seen the same thing time and time again. If you ask people, what are your biggest challenges these days? And then they'll tell you, and then you just drill down on those and keep going. Or, there's some kind of things that could be kind of hokey, but they still work. I say, hey, if you can wave a magic wand and have the perfect solution in 6 months, what would that look like? And just get them talking,
But where a lot of salespeople screw up on this, they like, I know that. I listened to Pat's podcast. He said to do that. So I did that. And they say something about, I got this issue with revenue. And immediately the salesperson goes, I know how to fix revenue. And they start pitching on that. As opposed to, well, what else? Well, what else? What else? Because you want to kind of get this long list of stuff. Because when you get that long list of issues that they have, pains and desires, a lot of people like to focus on pain, but lots of times it's aspirations. There's this happily ever after they want, where they see their business in 5 years. That's just as important too. And you kind of get this whole list, and then you can walk through, and they're going to be curious. They're saying, well, you've been talking a lot here, Pat. Do you think you can help me? They immediately feel like you can help just by asking the questions. And you just walk through that list and go, well, yeah, you said you had this problem. We can help you there. You said you had this issue. We can help you there too. You said you had this thing. Oh, we don't do that.
That's important too.
That makes you sound honest, right?
Absolutely. The other thing that I think you're accomplishing, and I'm sure this is by intent, is by asking questions and listening intently, and then asking follow-up questions or clarifying questions, is you're demonstrating that you are sincerely interested. And that's building rapport and empathy, or you're demonstrating empathy. Because, everybody, when we enter a conversation with a salesperson, everybody's guard kind of comes up, right? And if they jump in, I was on a call recently where exactly what you described, we were doing a discovery with the customer. The customer said one thing, and immediately somebody else on our team jumped in and said, we can do that. Let me tell you how we do that. And I was like, whoa. It's like, whoa, man. It's like, slow down. So let me ask
Lao Tzu has a quote. It goes, he who talks more is sooner exhausted.
What are the, do you have your chapter outlines? What are the different chapters that you're going to be, what would they be focusing on?
They're, cold calling, follow up, sideways deals.
Mm-hmm. Sideways
deals are something people bump into all the time. You think you got it figured out, and then all of a sudden somebody throws a monkey wrench into the machine, and the CFO comes in and says, we can't afford that. Or the person who you've been talking to gets fired. Now you got to restart the whole thing. And that greatly troubles people. I think I have one. Here's one I like about this. It goes, if you realize that all things change, there's nothing you will try to hold on to. If you're not afraid of dying, there's nothing you cannot achieve. If you're not afraid of dying, there's nothing you can achieve. We need to fully embrace the idea that every lead you have and every qualified opportunity you have is not going to close. They're going to die. Most of them are going to die. Expect them to die. Mm-hmm. But if we just allow things to happen, some are going to close. But to get attached to any one of these deals, that's just a waste of energy. We have to be okay with, we put our time in, we work the deals, we follow up 8, 10 times. And if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And the trick is that you just allow it to naturally happen.
I think that detachment is so important, because if you are, so emotionally attached to the viability of any specific deal, you're going to be on an emotional roller coaster. You need to just say, hey, I'm doing my best, and I can pat myself on the back because I did my best. But now the ball's in their court. And really, come on, man. Human beings are the most complex thing in the known universe. And typically in a B2B environment, you're selling not just to one person, but there's multiple people involved. There's competition involved. There's market dynamics. There's internal finances. How much can you control? What can actually you control?
We know what great sales looks like from a buyer's point of view. How many times have you gone shopping for something, and as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, I think this could work. I think this could fit for me,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and, I can maybe go this way or maybe go that way. I come from B2B sales. So you're working with a team of people, right? So collectively, they got to make a decision, and they all got their own agendas. And some of them are more worried about losing their jobs than they are making the company better, right? So you're kind of like a ringmaster, and you're kind of like trying to get them all and eventually sometimes there gets to be a point where they're really looking at this and they start talking to each other into it. You see this thing and you start talking yourself into it. Like, I could see how this fits. I could see myself driving this. I could see myself living in here. I could see myself doing this. And the salesperson's not doing anything other than answering the questions, facilitating it. That's masterful sales. If you can get yourself in a situation and this can be done where the people sell themselves, that's ideal. Lao Tzu's got this quote that says something along the lines that great leadership is when the job is done, the people say, we did it.
That's
we
awesome.
did it. It wasn't because of some strongman boss making this happen. The strongman boss in the background is like, well, you guys did a great job. You did a great job. The people who bought it, if we put this in the context of selling, that team could be your customers, and your customers are happy with the decision they made. They're proud of the decision they made. We worked really hard. Of course, the seller knows that, look, this would have never happened if I hadn't reached out to them. This would never, but they're happy to quietly go home and, cash their commission check.
What about this? I'm an advocate that every time you touch base with a customer or you have any kind of contact, you should be attempting to move the sales process forward, because at the end of the day, you do want to get to the close, right? Now, according to what you're talking about, you definitely don't want to push too hard, though, right? But you do want to move things forward. So how do you balance the need to kind of move things forward with the need not to be pushy?
I think, you should always be advancing the sale. And invariably, if you're asking open-ended questions, there's probably things that you can't follow up with. There's probably things you don't know right off the top of your head. And the trick is to make sure you just advance the sales, to schedule the next meeting. Just to do that, just to keep talking to them or saying, I can't answer that right now. Let me get back to you. Let me write that down. I tell you, I'll follow you up within 3 days, and I think I can follow up. I can get to that. What's your calendar look like next week? Do you think we can set up a time to follow up with this? It's just as simple as that. You're not closing them. You're not saying, what's it going to take for you to drive this car off the lot tonight?
Yeah, it's going to take the hand of God coming down. I hate that one. I hate that one. Come on, Mark. Just tell me your number, and I'll.
Yeah, just give me a number. I had a lady do that. I go, I told you my number a week ago.
Yeah,
I'll buy this car for this much. She goes, I can't do that. Okay, then we're done.
It's funny with cars. My last 3 car purchases, I've negotiated everything before showing up to the dealer. I've called them and said, this is my price. If you can do this, I'll come down. Because otherwise you go down there and then they make you wait for 2 hours while they talk with their manager. And I'm just like, I'm gonna hold off.
We shouldn't pick on car sales because it's really, the internet has really changed it.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what vehicles are worth. You can look it up and see it where everybody's selling the same car for the same price, So,
yeah, the guys that I have, guys and gals that I've had really good experiences with, though, even in the context of selling cars, have brought a lot of value to the conversation in terms of, hey, Mark, I know you're looking at this model. Let me just show you this other model here and explain to you, because based upon what you're telling me, this makes more sense. And as long as they're not trying to just upsell me for the sake of upselling me, but they're actually understanding what my needs are, or it could be, hey, in terms of financing, maybe you'd want to look at this program versus that program. And as long as they're really bringing value, that there are opportunities there, I think, to differentiate themselves. In terms of the name of the book is the Dao of Sales Babble. So are these basically a compilations from your previous podcasts? Is that what you're going to do?
Yeah, that's That's an interesting question. Actually, the way it all kind of worked was I started a blog post probably 12 years ago of taking Lao Tzu's work and converting it into sales. And I did that for like a year and a half. And then I kind of got done and I didn't know what to go with it. And I just kind of set it aside. About 2 years ago, I decided, you know what? I should really turn this into a book. I should really like make this something kind of my opus for my life. This is how I see selling, because I've approached selling from this point of view from the beginning, ever since I first started studying Taoism. So I decided with the podcast to stop interviewing people. I've interviewed many people on the podcast, and say I was just going to write a chapter in the book, and that would be my weekly episode. So I've actually used the podcast as a mechanism, to keep me moving forward on the book, commit myself to it. And that has really, really worked out. So I would do a podcast episode. And then once I kind of got the way I liked it, then I would maybe rewrite it, and I'm in a writer's group, and then they would review it. Awesome. And then I would get input from them, and then that would go into the book. And the writers group has helped me immensely. I've learned, it's really improved my writing skills, and the podcast has slowly been able to map this all out. It's been very, very enjoyable, much slower than I ever thought.
Well, most of my podcasts have always had guests, and for me that's easy because it's just having a conversation, just like we're doing right now.
Right.
Recently, I've started to do book reviews. Part of similar rationale. It was like I want to be forced to read a couple books a month on the topic of sales, personal development, and so on. And then by kind of preparing for a podcast on my own, I really have to kind of reflect on the material, and it helps to kind of edify what I've learned and sometimes apply it. But I got to say, for me at this point, it's a lot more work. Because when you have a guest, you can just have a conversation. So was it challenging for you to start podcasting just kind of on your own and talking about these different? Yeah,
it's a lot of work, but you've probably found this, Mark, to be true. In your studies, when you reach, doesn't it help? It helps build your brand better, so when you have a guest, the guest is the person that's highlighted, their name's on the top of the title, but people want to see that you are an experienced sales expert. You're somebody that people want to work with. And I would think that you're doing book reviews and getting your spin on it, whether you agree or not agree with it. It's got to be interesting. And then people can see, I can identify with Mark. I want to hire Mark, right?
Interesting. Yeah. No, I guess that, for full transparency, the idea with the Grow Fast podcast is just to provide value to our community because we're supported by a B2B SaaS platform, MQ RFP. So we just want to, and our target market is sales professionals and sales executives. But I think the personal branding thing, I haven't actually thought about that, but I'll let you know. So let's kind of go full circle, which is a Taoist thing, by the way, and come back to, before we talk about podcast, you mentioned that you started studying Taoism, maybe 10 plus years ago. How did that happen?
Oh, maybe 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. A friend of mine started a bookstore, used bookstore, and I helped her build the store. Literally, I was putting books on shelves. I didn't have anything to do with the business. I was just muscle. In all my work, she said, "You've been awesome. You should take a book. You should pick a book up." And I pulled the book off, and I Jia Feng's book with Jane English. I picked her book up. I picked that book up and I opened it up, and I don't know if you want to see it.
Sure.
I still have it. And Jia Feng was a very interesting guy. And he was Chinese. He translated it into English. And I started reading it, and I'm like, this is all gobbledygook. I don't get it. This makes no sense. And I set it aside for 10 years. And then I remember early in the 90s, I was reading of the Wall Street Journal, and there was an article that said, it was the story that we told before, that the greatest leader is when the job is done, the team says we did it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I was in management, And I was like, this is the kind of boss I want to be. And that kind of got me on the line. And then when I went from technology to sales, my background's actually software engineering. And then I went to go work for a startup. And I kind of taught myself sales and became a sales manager, VP of sales. I started digging back into this and going, oh, this is the right way to sell. I had done some pushy sales. It was awful. It was an awful experience. It just didn't make sense. And I'm trying to make people buy stuff, trying to talk people into buying stuff. I made a lot of mistakes early on. But
I still blush at there's 3 incidents that I can very vividly remember where I was pushy. I put my interest ahead of the customers. I was selling financial services, and this is 20 years ago, but I still blush about it if I think about it, where I put my interest, and they knew it, and the deal went sideways. And I just, I learned from it. It was like, I thought I was, because I had, mentors, and they would say, hey, when you're in this situation, here's what you do, and it would be kind of a manipulative kind of move. And it didn't feel right when I did it. But then when I would get the reaction, like, two of those people just ghosted me. They were like, we're done. We're done. And, so it might work.
Back then they would teach you goofy stuff like, like the hard close, like, well, what would work better? Do you want an orange, or would red be better for you? Like, just make the assumption close, right?
Yeah.
What would be easier for you, next Tuesday or next Thursday to meet? Like, gosh almighty, who talks like that?
Right.
Why not treat everybody like they're your cousin? Why not just be human and nice to people and say, what would work for you? You know what? If it doesn't work for you, they're probably not qualified.
Right. Or take a step back and say, maybe I haven't given them the right information, or I haven't asked the right questions. Right. So, yeah. So, okay. So you started studying, and then you applied the principles. I'm curious though, in a leadership role where you want your team to say they developed the solution, because obviously then they have buy-in, and they're going to be more energized and excited about the decision and the outcome, because they feel fully vested in it. How did you manage that? What kind of structure, or, what kind of conversations would you have?
I never, ever, I never talked a lot about Taoism with people on my sales teams, but I lived it. I didn't see the point at the time of really teaching them ancient Chinese philosophy.
Right.
It wasn't until I started podcasting did I really start to. In fact, I remember when I was blogging on this stuff, I hardly told anybody I was doing it. I didn't tell my people I was doing it. One or two would be interested in, what is that blog that you work on? And I would send it to them. I really. The people that I work with, the people I consult with today, they hear this stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't know did I answer your question? I don't know if I answered your question.
Definitely. Let's jump over to the podcast situation. A lot of people say, I don't know if it was you told me this story or somebody told me the story. Basically, it was, it used to be you'd go into a restaurant and you'd say, I have a podcast. And everybody like, what's a podcast? And now you go into a restaurant and you ask who doesn't have a podcast, and everybody raise, I've got one. So, or something along those lines. Is there still space? Is there still opportunities out there for podcasting?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's just so many niches a podcast could go into. The idea that you're going to have a podcast that rival Joe Rogan's, that's silly in this day and age. That time has come and gone.
Burst my bubble, Pat. Jeez. I'm joking. Okay, I'm going to go now.
But you can totally own a niche. Mm-hmm. You can totally be the go-to guy or gal for a set area with a podcast. And the podcast, it doesn't mean you're going to be running ads on your podcast and making buku bucks. That's not what that podcast is about. But podcasting does create an opportunity for you to if you want, to talk to anybody you want in an industry, because people are honored to be on a podcast. Honestly, Mark, I'm honored that you wanted me to be on this podcast. I mean, there's a lot of other people, probably better people than me, smarter people and more fluent.
I think we all bring something unique to the table
that you could have had. So thank you for doing this. Well, the same thing is true in your industry. You could talk to any executive who wouldn't take you. You couldn't cold call. You wouldn't be able to get to them somehow or other. But you ask them to talk about something that they care about, that would be great. But I got a client who does property management software.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have a podcast on property management software. They have a podcast on property management. So they talk to property management experts, people who've done this. And what does that create? That creates an audience of prospects. Every guest is a prospect.
Mm-hmm.
It's a chance for you to get to know somebody and talk to them and ask them about their lives and how their story and their journey, their hero's journey, right? How they got to where they are. And then at the end of the interview, they're going to invariably say, well, what exactly do you do? And you say, we sell property management software. Oh, it's funny you bring that up because I've been unhappy with what we have, or I've been thinking about, or I'm buying one. That's a way. That's a way of building a network into it, especially if you're a startup or if you got a new product that you're rolling out in a market or in a marketplace that you're not experienced with. I mean, this kind of growth is healthy for businesses. A business that's not growing is dying. I mean, because we see this in nature. You constantly got to be evolving, constantly got to be changing. There's something about what you're doing is you don't know anything about. A podcast can help you become informed.
Totally agree with you. In 2017, I was in the cybersecurity space. I moved in there. I was relatively new. I started a podcast and ran it for 4.5 years. I think recorded 161 episodes. Guess what? I learned a lot about cybersecurity, and it's a mile wide and it's a mile deep in so many different areas. And in the beginning, I was terrified because I was like, oh God, I'm talking to these people and I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. And I learned so much, and I made a lot of those connections that you're talking about. And it was really, really rewarding. This podcast is I feel much more at home starting this, because I've been in sales and marketing, business development my whole life. I've written a couple books on sales. And I'm still very much passionate about it because I think it is, come on, we're matchmakers. We help companies solve problems. And there's nothing more rewarding than working with somebody and helping them solve a problem and then maintaining that kind of that business and professional relationship. It's a very rewarding experience if done right.
Yeah. Podcasting has been one of probably the most fun, creative things I've done in my whole life. I'm so fortunate I bumped into it. I've genuinely enjoyed it, and it's been fun helping other people do the same thing in their industry. It's been very gratifying work.
I don't know if you know Bill Caskey. He does the Advanced Selling podcast. He was talking about some of his consulting clients. He advises them to do something very, very niche, just provide value, provide information, and he gave several examples of how even 6 months in, they were winning so much more business because they were providing value to an audience. The audience was growing, and then people were reaching out to them. So back to exactly what you were saying. Let's assume that
you don't need a big audience. That's the thing. Yeah. You don't need a big audience. You just need the right audience.
The right
qualified buyer, a qualified prospect. If they're listening to your little niche podcast, they're qualified.
That's awesome. Okay, let's assume that you're a small, medium-sized business and you're thinking about a podcast. What are some of the lessons learned or most important aspects that they need to get right?
So some of the things that I see that podcasters do wrong is they talk too much in these interviews. They like to show themselves. They like to show off what they know because they want to build their brand. But it's just plain rude to invite somebody to come in, and then you're doing 50% of the talking.
Now I'm feeling guilty.
No, this is this has been really great. I think.
Yeah.
Um,
It's good you get me in the afternoon. It's my afternoon. It's because I'm over in Europe, but if you got me in the morning when I'm highly caffeinated, I just don't shut up. So
yeah. Yeah, I've had a lot of coffee. That's why I'm doing all the chit chatting. I'm not used to actually doing all the chit chatting when it comes to interviews.
Yeah, it's kind of a role reversal here.
I've got 5 or 6 questions. Let me tell you these are the 5 or 6 questions I always like to ask when I'm interviewing somebody. It's like, how did you get here? There's a lot of things you could have done with your life. Why this? What surprised you? What are the challenges that you bumped into? What do you regret? What's really worked? Could you give us an example, a hard example of like where that worked? The results of some situation. And what are your aspirations? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I mean, these questions work for everybody when it comes to an interview-based podcast.
I think that's great suggestions. So where are you going to go from here? You're going to release your book. What's your plan?
Well, for this book, my plan is to promote this book, is to do what we're doing here. And in fact, what I would like to do is take interviews like this and actually put them on my podcast, which does 2 things. It makes it easy for me to put out an episode because I don't have to do any work. It also introduces my audience to your audience, which is really what I want to do. I want people to listen to your podcast. There's plenty of room for podcasts. For some people in some businesses, Mark, your podcast might be a better fit than my podcast. I believe there's plenty for everybody. There's plenty of room. There's no reason for me to be weird about this. So that's my intent, just to go on to a tour of getting on other people's podcasts. I've interviewed an awful lot of people. A lot of people kind of owe me. And they're all super duper nice. So that's my intention to promote that book. I actually been thinking about what's my next book. I'm not sure what that book's going to be, but what I'm doing here has taught me an awful lot. And it's been I love being creative. I love constantly growing and changing.
When will you be releasing the book?
I don't know.
No pressure. No pressure, Patty.
I'm hoping by the end of the year.
Okay. Awesome. Well, let me know, because we'll definitely, put links up and all that, and do some excerpts.
When you're writing a book, Mark.
What's that?
You've written a book? No, you've written a book, right?
I've written 2 books on sales. One is The Inside Game, How to Become a Top Performing Salesperson and Enjoy Every Step of the Way. And the premise is there are kind of 2 basic components of sales. There's the external behaviors that we do, like cold calling, setting the agenda, running a meeting, asking questions, and building trust. But then there are internal aspects of selling, which are, my attitude, and the games and the emotions that we play, working from a position of scarcity, which doesn't feel good. Oh my God, I only have 1 call today, or only 1 meeting today, versus a position of plenty where I've got 50 people to call and I've got 5 meetings. And I'm at that point, I don't even care how any of those meetings, end up, because I've got so much more. Right. So from my experience, if you're going to be in sales, it can be a real emotional roller coaster. You got to get your mind right. And it goes back to a lot of things that you started off the podcast talking about, is just acceptance, not trying to force things. You call somebody, you can't make somebody buy if they don't want to buy. So don't even try. When you call somebody, they're either going to say yes, no, or maybe. And you should be happy with the no, because if they say no, never, get it off your plate. Yay. I'm done with that one. If they say yes, that's a win. And if they say maybe, that's your future gold, because then you say, well, okay, I appreciate what you're saying. Would it be okay if I touch base with you every month or so and share some information when it comes up? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, yes. So you're planting seeds, right? So, but a lot of people, they wear their emotions on their sleeve. And if you're in sales, you can't do that. You can't shoot from the hip. You got to kind of have a plan, that's my premise, is what you're doing, your activities, but also what's going on in your noggin.
What advice do you have for me for writing a book?
Okay, I won't give advice, but I would say some of the most important lessons are set some time aside every day to just focus on the book, okay, and really just do not cheat yourself or the book out of that time. And something I heard recently, I'm listening to Tim Ferriss's Tool of the Titans, where he interviews, he's doing something similar where he's interviewed some of the most successful people in the world across all different types of industries. And he's compiled down the highlights and the lessons learned from those interviews. People like Arnold Schwarzenegger and, Dave Rubin and just, I'm drawing a blank, but like literally amazingly successful people. And one of the writers on there said, look, we all get writer's block. It's not writer's block. It's just we have days where we're not as productive, but it doesn't matter. You shouldn't put it off. Just tell yourself, I'm going to do a minimum of 2 crappy pages a day. Anybody can write 2 crappy pages, right? Don't put the pressure on that it's got to be, Pulitzer Prize winning stuff here. Just get in the habit. And I'm sorry, you asked me a question, so now I got my guest hat on. Right? I don't want to ramble on. But I think it was Somerset Maugham. He said something like that. Somebody asked him, like, how does inspiration play in your writing process? And he goes, oh, it's really important. But inspiration strikes from 10 o'clock a.m. to 2 p.m. every day. The point is, he sits down in the chair and just does the work, right? Jerry Seinfeld writes a joke every single day. Doesn't care if it's a good joke or a bad joke. He just writes
10 a day.
Okay, that could be the, yeah.
I think he writes 10 a day, and he knows that most of them are going to be awful. Yeah.
And take that pressure off.
That's kind of why I started that's why I converted my podcast from interviewing, because it would be a device for me to force me. Because my podcasts come out, I am I'm very professional about this, 3 a.m. Tuesday morning Central Time. Every podcast goes out exactly the same time. So I'm working on a timeline all the time. And that's forced me to write on this book. But I think you have a point where forcing myself to do this once a week is probably not enough. Maybe I need to up my game.
Everybody's got their own thing, but for me, if I was writing once a week, I would lose some of the rhythm, right? And I find that if I do something at least 5 days a week, even if it's just for a half hour, it starts to kind of build momentum and snowball. The connectivity is there. Otherwise, if for me personally, if I spend too many days between something, I have to take some time to kind of remember where I was at and get started again. Other people, they can probably do that, so I just, for what it's worth. Let me ask you, where do you look for, or where do you go to for inspiration, whether it be books, specific authors, sales trainers, or others?
I'm an avid reader.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an avid reader. I have read so many books that have given me so much inspiration. I don't know. John Steinbeck's East of Eden, I read a year ago. He actually talks about all this stuff. I'm reading Willie Nelson's The Tao of Willie Nelson. Wonderful book.
Funny.
It's a wonderful book. The man's
awesome.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Taking a note.
There's so much so many great books. I'm an avid reader. I read a lot. I read every morning when I wake up, something inspirational. I've been reading a lot of Native American spirituality books recently. I love history. I mean, I read a huge volume on Adolf Hitler's biography last year. There's so much. He was an expert at marketing and sales and building brand.
Yeah.
I mean, for all the wrong reasons. It's big. I'm a big fan of ancient Rome. I'm going through Stephen West Philosophizes podcast. I'm listening to every philosopher, every single episode on all the different philosophers. It's just absolutely, absolutely fascinating. And it all ties back to things that, that I've experienced in the past. I read a lot of Zen stuff. I'm a big fan of Alan Watts's work.
Mm-hmm.
He was just absolutely phenomenal. Ernest Hemingway. The style and the way he writes really touches me. The clarity.
He was amazing. I think maybe my favorite was for whom the bell tolls. I mean, there's obviously the short stories like Old Man and the Sea and things like that, but yeah, it's just
For Whom the Bell Tolls is a phenomenal book. Absolutely.
Yeah, and no man is an island. Tired to
no
himself.
No man is an island.
Yeah. Don't ask for who the bell tolls.
Yeah.
The bell tolls for thee.
See, and I don't want to get overly into this. A lot of people don't know is that Zen, people say is a very Zen person. It comes from Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is mostly Taoism with Buddhist meditation thrown in.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to. So when people hear a lot of Zen kind of things, it's usually founded in stuff that Lao Tzu wrote. And quite honestly, Lao Tzu didn't exactly invent all this stuff. He was a librarian. One day somebody asked him, would you write down all the highlights of the things that you read? That's what the Tao Te Ching is. It's the highlights of the wisdom of China at that time, 2,500 years ago. So
that's kind of what the Tools of the Titans is, or another one I like is Raval Navikant's Almanac, where they just compile all of the lessons learned. Tim Ferriss does from all the people he interviewed on the podcast. Naval does it from all the books that he's read, and he just distills it down into these massively potent doses of wisdom. But one of the lessons that runs through both of their books and all the people that they're quoting or that they've spoke to is that leaders are readers. And I haven't heard anybody on there say, I don't read. No, they're all just voracious readers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And people, if you're not an avid reader, I would encourage you to try reading more, because what I've found is it's not just the lesson that you're learning. It's the fact that you start to connect the lessons from this book to something on this book. And then sometimes that 1 + 1 comes out to be 3, and you get inspiration in a whole new way, and it's fun.
Absolutely. And if you're not a reader, because everybody's a different kind of learner. I'm an audio learner myself, which is why I like podcasts, and I listen to a lot of great podcasts. That's a good way to get started. But not everything that's great to read is in a podcast, so I read.
Do you have?
I like reading. I like reading, but the best way that I learn is audio. It's just the way my brain's wired.
Yeah, and you can do it while you're walking. That's what I love.
That's the power. That's the power of podcasting. You can do two things at once.
Yeah. Do you have a book that you go back to time and time again?
Yes. The Tao Te Ching.
There you go. Okay. Now we've gone full circle, which is a very
Taoist.
Taoist
There a second book?
Yeah.
There's a second book. Oh, Marcus Aurelius's book, in Meditations.
Yeah.
Is a great book to read over and over and over again. You can never get the Stoics were great. There's elements of Stoicism or aligns with Taoism. That's a great book to read. You can never get
It's
tired
funny
of
that you
book.
say that, because you're right. There are so many elements of just acceptance, right? We're all here temporarily. We all think what we're doing is super important, but in the great scheme of things, we're just going to be dust in the wind, and just accept it, man. And don't get yourself all, excited about it, and be careful with what you desire. Just tone down the desires. I know you want that sale. I know you want it, but you're just hurting yourself by desiring it so much, man. Just accept it. They're either going to buy or they're not, It's like,
I think the thing what I'm most excited about right now is that I've been reading this through Native American spirituality, like with the Anishinaabe people. I read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And you come to realize that there's this element of how the Native Americans worked is very similar to Taoism, that there's an interconnectedness with everything in the world. We are all part of everything else. we're not like separate, which is how a lot of Western philosophy thinks, that we came from someplace else. We live here briefly and then we go someplace else. I mean, these people in the Taoists feel this way too. We are all interconnected. We are all family, and we're constantly evolving and changing, just as the sun rises and the sun sets. The seasons come and the seasons go. The spring is happening right now slowly. Like, there is this constant kind of wave that we're all a part of. And if we can understand that and we can ride that and we can be much more accepting that, things are going to change. Things are going to move. And everything that I talk to and work with has something to do with something else that I have to do. I don't even know what that statement I just said. I don't think that makes any sense, but I hope it gives people the essence of like what I'm trying to say, that there's an interconnect. This chair would fall if it wasn't for the floor pushing it up. Right. The floor wouldn't be if there weren't for chairs to sit on it. There's a connection to that. The same is true when we sell. The same is true whenever we're trying to persuade people. It's really not persuasion. It's just like a conversation of like, maybe I can help you. Maybe you can help me. Maybe collectively, the two of us can help each other. Something that's mutually beneficial.
Mutually beneficial. That's a huge part of it. I just a couple more comments, and then we can kind of sort of wrap this up. But what you're talking about there, and this podcast, by the way, is going in a direction that I didn't anticipate, but I'm really enjoying it. I feel like connected in the U.S. when I'm out in nature, when I go to places like the Grand Canyon or the Rocky Mountains or the Pacific Ocean, and I look and I'm in awe of nature, and I feel like I'm part of something much, much bigger than myself. Okay,
you are.
And then I have a similar experience, but different when I come to Europe, and I'm going through these towns where the buildings are 5, 7, 100 years old or 1,000 years old. And then I realize, oh my God, how many people have lived and died in these villages? And they thought that they're getting that deal was super, super important. And that was 15 generations ago. And I'm going to be just the same. So as important as I think it just drills it home when you see it, right? It's like, and I'm not as cognizant of that in America. Because, the houses in my neighborhood are all, 20, 30, 40 years old. It's just like, well, we've been here for, and we're always going to be here. But when I'm in Europe, I have that same kind of feeling when I see nature in America. I see it just, hits you in the face with, wow, there's been a lot of people here for thousands of years, and we're going to be just like them pretty soon.
Yeah. I get that. I'm going to Normandy in April to help work on some projects there. The history of that beach.
Oh, that's, yeah.
I'll be in Paris for a little while. I'm looking forward to spending a day or two just in the Louvre. Paris is a beautiful city. It has a huge history. Napoleon designed it. It's like a lot of that stuff didn't work, but some of the stuff still is here today. But at the same time, I hike the woods that I live in here in Illinois, and I think about the Potawatomis, the Ojibwas, the Chippewas, that lived here, the Fox peoples, and their spirit. Is it still here? They think it still is. They think their ancestors are still here because they are, because we're all interconnected. We're all here. We're all made up of the same molecules and atoms. We're all, they're just constantly changing and converting. It's just in a constant cycle of change. Heraclitus, right? The Greek philosopher said, the only thing that remains the same is change. So, yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see your book. And I again, especially for that emotional and mental aspect in terms of that part of selling that I talked about, I think it's hugely helpful for people just realize you can't force things, and it's just emotionally draining to try to do that. but also it doesn't benefit you with your relationship with customers. So I think there's a huge opportunity for you to share that kind of outlook with sales professionals all across the States and everywhere. So, hey, Pat, thanks so much again. I really appreciate it. It's early days for the Grow Fast podcast, but it's been a great conversation and a big honor to have you on here, man.
Oh, Mark, I really appreciate you having me visit. Thank you very, very much.
Awesome.